the goal of the project is first to identify where truck parking exists within the state, creating that inventory. The Connecticut DOT has already started that with their freight plan. They created an inventory of where parking exists. And then we're going to kind of develop and go forward in terms of trying to produce a data system that would allow kind of real-time parking accessibility or real-time parking information for truckers as they're coming through the state.
All right, this is Tyson Fisher, Landline Magazine Associate Editor, and I am here with Dr. Eric Jackson and Dr. Mohammad, Razaur, Rahman, Shaon. These are researchers at the University of Connecticut who are developing a truck parking app. So thanks for talking with me today, guys.
Great to be here. Happy to talk about truck parking.
So before we get into truck parking in the app, why don't you two kind of tell me a little bit about yourself and the work you do at the University of Connecticut?
Sure. So the Connecticut Transportation Institute is a partnership with the Connecticut Department of Transportation. A lot of our work centers around motor vehicle crash reports. So we compile motor vehicle crash reports from across the state, from every single police department. Then we generate a website where we put all that data up online and make it available to the public. And then we work with engineers like Shaon, who help us analyze that data, provide some tools for the DOT to be able to identify issues and hotspots, and essentially become an advocate for safety throughout the state. And, I'll turn it over to Shaon to give maybe a little background on what his focus area is.
Yep. Hello. My name is Mohammad Shaon. I'm an associate research scientist at the Connecticut Transportation Institute. So my major role here is I'm working as a lead data analyst for our Connecticut roadway safety management system, as Eric mentioned. So we collect the crash data and roadway data from Connecticut DOT. We analyze it, and we actually developed a web-based analytic tool that can implement six-step highway safety manual procedure. We also expanded the tool to include systemic safety, vulnerable road user safety assessment. So we do a lot of different kind of safety analysis using the crash data and other data sources we collect from different sources. I'm also working as a PI for the truck parking study that we are conducting at UConn. And we are also involved with other autonomous vehicle technology evaluation and virtual reality, using virtual reality to understand pedestrian behavior, this kind of things at City High.
All right, excellent. So to talk about the truck parking app, it looks like the university's, it's called the Connecticut Transportation Safety Research Center, has received, it looks like nearly $2 million in funding from the US DOT, FMCSA, and the state DOT to develop an app for truck parking. So from what I understand, this is a 3-year pilot project. So what does this project entail?
Sure. So I'll kick it off and then turn it over to Shaon. So the goal of the project is first to identify where truck parking exists within the state, creating that inventory. The Connecticut DOT has already started that with their freight plan. They created an inventory of where parking exists. And then we're going to kind of develop and go forward in terms of trying to produce a data system that would allow kind of real-time parking accessibility or real-time parking information for truckers as they're coming through the state. And maybe Shaon can go into a little more detail on what that may entail.
Yep. So as you know, so for any kind of system, we need to know where the parking locations exactly are. So that once we know that, then we can provide this information to the truckers within the state. Okay, there's a truck parking, and this is the number of parking available at this location. So what we had to do is we took the information from the city freight plan where the current parking locations are. We're enriching the data by collecting data information like the amenities available, number of parking spots available, and all other information regarding those parking locations. Once that is done, then we'll identify corridor within Connecticut to implement a ITS infrastructure to collect truck parking information in real time, and then provide this information to the truckers via a mobile app or the dynamic master signs within the state.
Gotcha. So I'm guessing then just based on the limited data that is available, that this app would pretty much include mostly just publicly available truck parking, like state-owned rest areas. Is that pretty much what the focus is going to be on?
Yes, so the way we propose this project is we will develop these truck parking app for selected facilities. So for example, a couple of facilities where we'll collect this data and then publish this data for the to the truckers in real time. So at the beginning of this app, so it won't include the all the parking locations in Connecticut, but we'll develop the system to publish this information to the trucker. Then later on, this can be expanded to include all public parking locations within Connecticut.
All right. So I read that your team will also inventory the supply of public and privately available truck parking. How will that data be collected, especially when it comes to the private truck parking? So how will that data be collected, and then how will it then be used?
So we did, as I mentioned, City Freight Plan actually created an inventory for all the public and private parking locations, truck parking locations in Connecticut. But the data set created by City DOT is limited in the sense of amenities, like is there any washroom, is there any food available? So what we did is we enriched the data by looking at the Google Street View, like latest Google Street View images, and identified what are the informations that we can collect from different sources and added more informations to it. So that's how we are actually enriching that data set so that we can use this as a base data set when we will develop these parking app.
And we've also worked with a company called Atri. Atri collects GPS tracking data of trucks. And what we're taking that data and we're analyzing that data to try and figure out GPS location-wise, where are trucks parking? And then we're trying to develop these hotspots of, all right, we know there's a group of trucks parking here. What is at that location? Is it a private lot? Is it a public lot? Is it an on-ramp? Is it an off-ramp? We're trying to really understand where truckers are being forced to park as their hours of service come up, and then trying to understand, we're merging in some crash data with that as well to understand where are crashes occurring with trucks that are parked, and where are kind of these hotspots for crashes. So, I mean, these could be future locations where either the Connecticut DOT or private companies need to start providing parking for truckers to try and prevent these types of crash events from occurring in the future.
So although this is primarily a way for truckers to find parking, what you're saying is this data could then also be extrapolated to figure out where future needs are for truck parking, and hopefully inform, as you mentioned, the state DOT to where they can construct these parking. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So my goal for this is we already have truck parking existing in the state. How do we optimize that use? We optimize that use through an app to be able to provide real-time information to truckers on where to park. Once we've kind of reached our limit of, all of our spaces are full, then providing, whether it's the DOT or private industry, information on if you're adding new parking, these are the locations where adding more parking is going to be most beneficial based on the supply and demand for parking in the state.
Okay. So this truck parking information management systems. I mean, this is something that's been implemented in other states. I know there's some a collection, I believe, is around 8 Midwest states got a federal grant on that, and it looks like that you guys have done literature review on these systems. Is this going to be similar to those systems? Are there going to be any key differences? Like, what's the comparison between what you guys are doing and already existing information systems?
So I can add a little bit on this one. So we did the literature reviews. As we know, we are at the first phase of this project. So currently we are, as Eric mentioned, so we are exploring the existing parking events, where they're occurring, what are their patterns, what are their relation with crashes. During our literature review, we identified, like you mentioned, so MASTO is one of the agency who implemented multi-state truck parking information management system. So we are looking into those as a reference. So in phase 2 of this project, what we'll do, as we mentioned, that we'll start identifying corridor and start implementing that ITS framework. So basically, our plan is to follow what is the best practice in the United States using the truck parking information management system developed by other agencies, and add value to that by adding more information or adding ITS technology that can better identify or better detect truck parking events and provide this information in real time to the truckers.
Great. I also read that so this we're talking about truck parking availability in Connecticut, but I read that you guys will also identify parking in neighboring states. So my question about that is, how is that data going to be compiled? I mean, are bordering state DOTs collaborating with you guys on this to provide that data as well?
Until now, we only collected data for Connecticut, and the ATRI data that Eric mentioned is also collected in Connecticut. So currently we don't have data from neighboring states. We are only focusing on Connecticut, but maybe in future, if we have that data, we can definitely enrich our analysis using the same analytic framework and see whether we can feed this information available. So as Eric mentioned, so our ultimate goal is to optimizing the parking locations. So if you cannot add more parking, so you can provide this information that, okay, there was no parking space available in Connecticut, you can cross Connecticut and park in maybe Massachusetts or in New York. So these information will also be valuable to the truckers in real time, and they can decide based on their driving limits whether they should enter Connecticut or they should take rest before entering Connecticut, based on if there is parking locations available in Connecticut or not. But for now, we don't have this information in our research team.
But long term, this is something that you are looking to include. Okay.
Definitely, yes.
So since we're on the topic of just like that region in general, the news release mentioned that there's a hope that this project will spur further use of what is called intelligent transportation system applications throughout the Northeast. So the first question is, what are intelligent transportation system applications, and then how can they be applied throughout the region?
So the ITS framework that we proposed is, our initial idea is we are going to purchase some cameras that can detect truck parking in real time, and then we can process this data and provide to the truckers in real time that, okay, for example, if at a parking location, if there's 10 parking locations available and 8 of them are already occupied, so there is 2 parking left. So we can provide this information to the truckers in real time. So ITS currently is, you see cameras installed at intersection. These are the device that we called intelligent transportation system, where we can collect this data as a video or as a trajectory, and then we can process this data to achieve our research goal or application goal. So for this project, our goal is to use either camera or other kind of sensors to identify what are the parking spots that are currently occupied and how many of them are free, and how we can process this information and provide this information to the truckers in real time. So there's another media that we'll use to disseminate this information, as I mentioned. So we can either use develop a truck parking app to provide this information, or we can use the state DMS system to provide this information on the side of the roadway on the variable masses signs.
Yeah, you see this type of technology in like parking garages where it'll say, the 3rd floor has 300 available spaces, the 4th floor has 500 available spaces. Is that type of system where we could put a sign out on the interstate that says, 10 miles ahead, there's so many spaces available. We've also talked with several trucking agencies, and there's an interest in exploring, is there an ability to actually reserve a space coming up? And what type of reservation system, what would that look like? Is that something an industry would support, that you can essentially reserve a spot, and then when you get to that station, that spot is reserved for you to be able to park? So we're going to be able to also try and do some surveying of truckers to try and get some feedback on what type of system do they think would benefit them and their ability to move goods across Connecticut.
Sure. And Dr. Shaon, you actually touched on something that I wanted to just briefly talk about, which is the methods by which we collect this data. I know that in other states, there has been a mix of technology. You mentioned both of them, which is cameras being one and sensors being another. Based on the research you've done so far, is there a preference on either one? Is there a benefit to one or the other, or is it both good options?
So there is pros and cons for each of these. technologies. So when you go into the field and start collecting data, so for example, for cameras, if it's the daytime, you can easily collect this data, but in adverse weather condition or nighttime, it's difficult to collect using those, but sensors can collect those. But sensors has a lot of noise and it is faulty in a lot of conditions. So there is actually pros and cons. So we still haven't decided what kind of technology we'll implement. When we'll get to the point in phase 2, then we'll decide which would be the better option based on the existing use and the lesson learned from the states who has already implemented it. So then we'll decide, okay, this is the technology that we should adopt based on the feedback from other states who has already used this kind of technology to collect parking information.
Sure. I also see that so in addition to a possible app to reach truckers with, it also looks like that some other possibilities here include reaching out to truckers through the ELDs. I see was one option, and then the other option is what's called dedicated short range communication units. That I'm not so clear on what that is. Can you kind of explain what that would include?
So in connected and automated vehicles, DSRC is kind of a radio frequency that's emitted out, and then there's receivers in the vehicles that can get things like signal phasing and timing, so you know if the light is green or red. So it's just a way to kind of broadcast out a message of whether it's the number of spaces or availability or peak times of when parking is available or not available. So it's just a way of broadcasting a message. One of the things that I hope comes out of this project is the ability to standardize some of that messaging that goes out. I don't want to develop an app specific just to Connecticut. So if we can develop a standardized broadcasting message or a standardized database or information structure that could then feed in a national app, whether it's like a Google app that you basically open up your Google Maps and it'll show you where availability is. I think a nationwide solution is really where we need to go and not have a piecemeal patchwork of apps across the country.
100% on that, and that's something that I've noticed that there. You put it perfectly. Yeah, which is there is a patchwork, of truck parking apps, especially with the, as we mentioned, there are different regions in the U.S. that incorporate this TPIMS system, but you would have to have a different, method to get that. But we don't have a national framework, so that is something you guys are kind of hoping could happen here, because that would be excellent news. That would be excellent news for that would be big news for truckers if they had like a one-stop shop for, at the very least, publicly available truck parking.
I think that could potentially be a recommendation that comes out of our study, is that there needs to be a national guideline or a national standard on what truck parking information comes out of these ITS solutions, so that it's an open source type of data feed that can be consumed by all potential software vendors.
Going back to Connecticut specifically, so in the news release that was issued by the university, Dr. Jackson, you were quoted as saying that expanding public truck parking in Connecticut is challenging and basically not being considered. Can you kind of expand on that? Like, what are the challenges that are preventing truck parking expansion in that state?
So Connecticut is probably one of the most densely populated states in the country. And our interstate system was built in the late 1950s, where we had already had a pretty developed community and urban infrastructure. So the ability for right-of-way of land to be able to build large truck stops or stops where you can put, a couple hundred trucks just doesn't exist in Connecticut. Our on and off ramps, a lot of them are even already too tight that it's difficult for trucks to even make the turns to get on and off. So if in Connecticut, if we're going to add any new type of truck parking, we're going to have to try and find some innovative ways and methods to be able to generate the real estate that's needed to be able to host trucks. Once you get down towards the southwest corner, you're right outside of New York City. The land down there is so extremely valuable and expensive. Building out parking in that region is just extremely cost prohibitive. So it's coming up with some unique solutions to meet the demands without having a large or significant real estate impact.
Yeah, good. That makes perfect sense. So it looks like we are in fairly early phases of this project. Is there an anticipated launch date for the app, or what can we look forward with this project?
So currently, as we mentioned, so we are in the phase one. So where currently we have analyzed the parking data, truck parking data to understand designated and undesignated parking. So our next step is to conduct the supply demand analysis. We already started collecting the data. Hopefully by the end of August or September, maybe by end of September, we'll be able to conduct all the preliminary analysis, and then we'll start identifying corridors where we want to implement this ITS infrastructure, and then we'll start developing the app based on the data we collected. So best guess is it won't start before the mid of 2025 at least, but because we have to collect some data at the beginning, we need to see how the data looks like, process it, and then we can start developing the tool to disseminate that kind of information. So hopefully after mid 2025, we should be able to get some data and start developing this tool.
Okay, excellent. That pretty much answers all the questions that I have. Is there anything that I may have missed that you guys would like to add?
I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm good as well.